So we began talking about the importance of getting close to God. That's what the Lord really has for us. He wants us to have an orientation of our lives that we get close to God. And one of the things that we're trying to establish really clearly, a couple things, is He really wants us to be closer to Him. And secondly, that being closer to Him is not just a possibility, it is more than a probability, it is a certainty. Because if we seek Him from the heart, if we seek Him with an understanding in our heart that He's our Creator, that He's the one who loves us, that He is God, if we seek Him, we will find Him. That means we'll discover who He is yet more. And in the discovery, every discovery, we'll find our hearts enlarged to be able to love. And we'll have a wisdom and a discernment that comes from the Holy Spirit about what life is about. I said last week that as I was praying and receiving this word, it came real clear to me that there was this ache and longing in the heart of God for a greater intimacy with His people. In other words, He really does care about you specifically by name, and you're approaching Him and getting to know Him more personally and intimately. It's not a concept. It's very personal with God. Many people think the wrath of God is more personal than this, but that's not true. He made us. He made us, designed us. Who we are in the depths of our being was made for this, living in experiential intimacy with God. And He wants to say and encourage us, you know me, but you could know me so much better. And I really want you to know me so much better so that your joy would be made full. In other words, you'd have a dimension of joy that is way above the circumstances falling in line for you. You'd have such a joy that you would not be discouraged. Because you know where discouragement comes from, don't you? A misplaced hope in things turning out a particular way. It's a hope in things, circumstances, and people, but it's not a hope fixed in God. When you have your hope and my hope fixed in God, what that means is that I never have to be discouraged, because there's never a time when God will fail me or fail you, and where I will always know that my hope will be justified and validated by the testimony of the saints around the throne, by the angels, by time and existence itself, because there's nothing more sure than the faithfulness of God. Nothing's more sure than that. As we get to know Him from the heart, not as concepts, really important, as we get to know Him and experience Him from this heart that is the very core of our being, we are just going to, we will think different, and our attitude's going to be different, and how our life is will be shaped by that difference. It's like a total loss in so many respects to live life and not live from the knowing who God is. Because we didn't think our way into this. And we aren't sustaining our lives right now. I mean, you can commit suicide. Yeah, okay. That's not a life choice. That's a choice for death. But as far as having life itself, all that comes from God, and He sustains us. He could decide it's time for any of us at any time. And so this God that we're talking about right now, this personal, loving God, the reality is you don't, this is a forever God. We were created in time, but not for time. Huge difference. We're created in time, but not for time, not just for this existence. But if our knowing of God is so faint, it's just like a shadow or just such a faint voice that it can hardly be discerned, we will supply the lack with how we want our lives to be so construed from our ignorance. Our life will be guided from ignorance, right? Isn't that true? We'll make up a reason for living. We'll find something to do, that's for sure. We'll try to get satisfaction from our own design, but the reality is it just doesn't work. There's something there, but it doesn't work. When I was in England, I had to make sure that if I brought any kind of technological thing that required an outlet, like a tape recorder, I had to make sure that I changed they had some kind of adapter to compensate because they're running a lot higher voltage than us. So something has to step down for it to work, because if I happen to plug it in there, it will burn up. It'll just be dead. And so we have we have two sources of power, brothers and sisters, that I'm talking about. The power that we want to engineer and motivate and direct our own lives based in time without God, that power will always kill us. It'll be a dead end. It may look, and it does sometimes, it might work for a little while, but after a while you'll smell smoke and it will be burned up. And that's the nature of creation itself. This creation, as beautiful and as of God as it is, will be transformed in the burning when he comes back. It will be transformed into something different that will be made more directly and suited more intimately for eternity. This isn't it now. What am I talking about? I'm talking about intimacy with God and knowing God. And there's a direct connection. Knowing God makes a huge difference on how you live your everyday life. To the degree that we know him intimately from the heart and that we know him personally, he has a personal interest in us. We have a personal interest in him. And we understand for us it's a life issue, not a spiritual, religious issue, but it's a life issue. It means everything about life now and forever. That knowing will fill our time with the aroma of infinity and eternity. We'll be living in time, but not for time. You never want to live just for time. We'll be in time, but our existence will be fueled from a life that comes from the throne of God, not our own efforts or our own creativity, which is nothing compared to the Lord's. So why do we want to know God? We want to know God because we were designed by God. Everything ends up in God. And we're called to reflect who he is. It's supposed to affect how we think about life. So how close do we want to be with God? If we're close enough, we'll say, I want to be closer. If we're close enough, we'll say, I want to be closer. If we're not even close enough, we'll think, I don't know. I don't know how close I want to be. That's why you go and you talk to your spirit, and you go to your heart. And when it's all quiet, you ask, why am I here? Kierkegaard says that someone who's a friend to someone else will help them be alone and not just listen to everyone else. Help them to be alone with God so they can make sure that how they're living isn't so conditioned about how everybody else is living or how they're thinking, isn't influenced by just how everybody else is thinking. Because without that silence, people will go on remote control and just live off the steam that's emitted from the heat that other people are evaporating from their being. And no one will really know what they're doing, but they'll be comfortable because everybody else is doing it too. It's what he and numbers of people call the herd mentality. Most people figure out what they should be doing by looking around and seeing what everybody else is doing. And then if most people are doing it, they feel comfortable. If only a few people are doing it, they feel uncomfortable. And God is saying, do not find out the rhythm of your heart based on the beating of the hearts of others, but by the beating of my own heart. Because if you get those rhythms confused, you'll be destined to live for time alone. You could be a good person and live for time alone, but you will not be a person that's filled with the eternal love of God. And outside of love, this love, we're destined for the tedium of just moving one day after the next day and looking around and thinking, well, this is what everybody else is doing. They all can't be wrong. But we have plenty of examples from history to know that's not true. So the Lord wants us to know him intimately. And what difference does it make? I explained some things, but here I want to tell you something about being close is what I want to focus on. Because numbers of people say, well, I know God. We're not just saying that you've had a hug from him once in a while, or that you have a kind of a casual experiential knowledge of him. I mean, there's people who have acquaintances. We're not talking about acquaintances. Sometimes it's amazing how acquaintances can call themselves friends. And one person said, actually, they were writing an article, or an article was written about him, and I was shocked to read from the person that I was considered his best friend. And I thought, I don't know how he thinks that. And so it's like, it's got to be mutual. And that's the nature of best friends. And what we're saying is, we want to be good friends with God. We're not just talking about heaven and hell. We're talking about how you live your life now and forever. And to be close to God, I want to use the analogy of friendship. I could use lots of analogies. But close and good friendship. When you have a friend with a good friend, very close friends, let's say like best friends, if that word isn't overused, sincere best friend, one friend will influence the other. One friend's opinion will influence the other. And the temperament of one friend affects the other. If your best friend is very forgiving, it'll affect your own disposition to be forgiving to your best friend. Actually, those relationships can affect your relationship with other people. I mean, your disposition in general is to be, hey, I'm a person who forgives, just like my best friend forgives. The nature of best friends is that they share their lives. I mean, they're very generous with one another. If a best friend was aware that that best friend of his or her had a real need, they would really enjoy, that would be the word, not obligation, they'd really enjoy of helping that person meet that need, wouldn't they? They would, because they really have a love for their friend, and they wish their best friend goodness and blessing on their life, and that's how it would be. Best friends know how the other one thinks without even have to ask. I mean, initially they had to ask, but after a while, they know if they could set up a hypothetical situation, like what would they like for a weekend? If my best friend for me wouldn't be saying quilting. He'd really like some special time just to quilt. No, that is not my dream. It's kind of a silly thing, except for quilters. But the point is that you just immediately can guess what that would be because you're close and intimate with each other. You're getting what I'm saying, right? The reason I'm drawing it out, brothers and sisters, is I want you to understand that that's the way it is with God. If you are close to God, you would know what he's thinking. And you'd know he knows what you're thinking. If you were close with God, you would expect generosity and you'd be generous with him. If you were close with God, like a good friend to another, you would trust him because over time, like with your friend, you know what to trust him about and he's faithful in that or she's faithful in that. God's like that too. Because you're close to him, you have a greater conviction from lived out experience that that person, now in this case, this divine person is trustworthy. And is forgiving and that he is generous. Do you understand how all that affects how we live now and what we experience of God now? So even if just this, we say, God, I want to be your best friend. I want to be your friend and have a confidence and a heart witness that you call me your good friend. If that was just even our aim, because we understand that everything about life doesn't really make sense and leads to a dead end. Without this intimacy, we would make a decision to pursue him and to know him, and he would have influence on you and on me. And there's no question we would have influence on him because we're close, we're tight. Why do you want to be close with God? I want to be close with God because I want that kind of intimacy. And it happens, first of all, by just wanting it, believing that it's available, and pursuing it, knowing that God is with you even in the pursuit. Always remember, in our relationship with God, God is there. In other words, he's helping you in the relationship. He's not standing and waiting to see what we're going to do. But that he's like, yeah, come on, that's it. Come, you who are weary, heavy laden, come to me. Come close. I don't cast out anybody. Come to me. See the veil torn in two? That means you're welcome. Come on. Throne of grace, built on grace and mercy and help. See what I want? That's what I'm about for you. Why not enjoy it? I'm here for you. I made you for forever. Here we are. Call me Father. More than a friend, but a friend too. So brothers and sisters, the first thing is desire it. Ask the Lord to reveal to you and to me. All life is about knowing him as he really is. And it makes all the difference for now and forever. Amen.